My name is Aaron. I work at Adventures in Homebrewing in Ann Arbor, and I've been brewing for about 10 years. Today we're going to show you how to make a batch of extract version American Pale Ale right in your own home. Alright, so the first thing we're going to have is our specialty grains, which add the color and flavor to the actual beer itself. Next thing we're going to be adding is going to be our malt extract base, which gives the beer the body and the fermentable sugars that the yeast can use to convert to alcohol and CO2. Next addition is going to be our hops, here in the whole cone form. That's what are going to be giving the beer its bitterness, flavor, and aroma. And the very last step, once we've boiled all that together and put it into the fermentation bucket, is going to be to add our direct pitch dry yeast, which is actually going to start to convert all of the sugars that we've put in there into CO2 and alcohol and give us our finished beer. So the first thing we're going to do is add our 1.5 gallons of water that we're going to use as the base of our beer, and that we'll also use to steep the specialty grains mentioned earlier to extract the color and the flavor from the beer. Really getting there. Okay, so we're just at our 160 temperature that we need to actually go through and steep our specialty grains to extract the color and flavor. So we're going to go ahead and get those into the water to start the extraction. So we're going to put our steeping grains into the water and get those soaked and start the extraction process. Okay, so our specialty grains have steeped for about 15 minutes to extract all the color and flavor away. So now we're going to remove those, allow the excess water to drain out, and then we are going to bring the what is now wort to a boil and add our extract that'll make up the fermentable sugars that the yeast are going to eat. So now we're to the point to where our wort has come to a boil, and we're going to add in our malt extract to dissolve this. Again, this is our extract base, which is going to become the base fermentable sugars that the yeast are going to convert into alcohol once the beer is finished. Okay, so what we're going to do now is take some downtime while we're waiting for our wort to come up to a boil before our first hop addition, and actually go through and sanitize the equipment that our yeast is actually going to be fermenting the beer in. Sanitation is important in the brewing process because it actually kills off any unwanted wild bacteria and wild yeast that could otherwise sour or ruin a batch of beer. Okay, so now we've come to our good rolling boil on the wort. We're now going to add our first hop addition of the U.S. Centennial hops, which are very floral, very citrusy American hop. First addition is going to add our bitterness that's going to be provided to the beer. So we're coming up on 15 minutes left in the boil, so now we're going to do our second to last addition of hops, which is going to provide all of the hop flavor that's actually going to go into the beer. So now we're doing our 5-minute, which is going to be our last addition of hops into the boil. This is the hop addition that's going to provide all of the aromatics for the actual beer when it's finished brewing. Nice color to it. Okay, so our beer has completed the boil, and now what we're going to do is we're going to add our immersion wort chiller, which acts as a heat exchanger that draws heat away from the wort and brings the temperature of the beer down to the point of the pitching temperature of our yeast, so that the yeast can survive within the wort at the standard fermentation temperature that we're going to use for this particular beer. Okay, so now the beer is cooled to the point in which we can actually add it to the fermenter. What we're going to do is add the concentrated wort that we have to the fermentation bucket And then at that point in time, we're going to top up the beer to the full 5 gallons that we need to complete our batch. What we've done here is we've taken a hydrometer, which is used to measure the amount of fermentable sugars before and after fermentation to determine our approximate alcohol by volume. What we can see here is that the beer is actually setting right about where it should be for this particular batch. So our next step after this is going to be to actually go ahead and direct pitch our yeast into the fermenter, allow that to sit for about 7 to 10 days, in which course the yeast is going to culture and convert all of the sugars that are in the actual beer itself into alcohol and CO2, which will then produce our finished beer. Okay, so now we have the last portion of the actual brewing process, which is pitching our yeast. This is a freeze-dried yeast culture, which is similar to your baker's yeast or some of your wine yeast that you see out there. What this yeast is going to do is it's going to eventually rehydrate within our beer. Over the course of the next 7 to 10 days, it's actually going to convert all of the sugars that we've provided to the beer into alcohol and CO2. After about 7 to 10 days, that's actually going to convert what we have now as a young beer or a wort into what you'll see as an actual beer. Beyond that, we will take that beer and either put it into a bottle and carbonate it naturally with a little bit of residual sugar, or put it into a keg the way that a brewery or a microbrewery would, and put it on draft, and you're more or less ready to drink. So let's go ahead and pitch our yeast. Simple as that. What we're going to do now is close the fermentation chamber or a fermentation bucket so that the yeast can ferment without having any outside bacteria or yeast come in and infect the beer, which can create some off flavors. Close it off with a sealed airlock with some water in it. After about 24 hours, we'll have active fermentation, and we have just completed our first batch of extract version homebrew. So that was the basic brewing process using malt extract, some steeping grains, and whole leaf hops. Hope you've enjoyed the process. In about 2 weeks, the beer will have fermented. The yeast will have converted the sugars over to our alcohol. After that point in process, we can put the beer either into bottles to allow it to naturally carbonate, or into a keg and force carbonate it, similar to the way that they put beer on draft in bars. And that is it. Hope you've enjoyed the process. Cheers.